بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum everybody and welcome back to Connections episode 9. We're joined again with our dear friend Sheikh Idris. Assalamu alaikum Sheikh Idris. Alhamdulillah, thanks for joining us today again for another episode of Connections. And we're here today. The name of today's episode is The Tensions of the Psyche. And this is based on a lecture and some work that Sheikh Idris has put together on the 4 tensions of the psyche, which I'm really curious about. I know he gave me a little bit of a primer onto it, and that it relates to the 4, what can we say, the 4 sources of tension, the 4 sources of evil, the 4 enemies of the human being, as is sometimes organized in our tradition. The 4 enemies being nafs, hawa, shaitan, and dunya. Those are the 4, which is nafs being the self, the ego, hawa, which is, we can say, folly or desire.
We'll get into that, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
We've got to unpack all these things. Yeah.
Shaitan being, of course, the devil, and dunya being the base world, the worldly dimension, the lower dimension of this world that we're in. And before we jump into Sheikh Idris and what he has to say, and I'm really curious to hear what he has to say, I was just reflecting on those 4 in coming up to this session, and I couldn't help but every time I think of 4, I think 4 seasons, 4 elements. And I was thinking, how would those fit with the 4 seasons, 4 elements? And what I found was that in some way they do match.
This relates to your work, is it?
And this relates to the hikmah model, the tib model, but also just in general, I think the cosmological model of the Muslims, the 4 elements, the 4 qualities, and the arkan, all these different things. And so hawa, even though hawa, kind of this air or wind being attached to the element of air, dunya being literally the world or earth, and shaitan being fire, and then the nafs being water, this element of water, shahwat, water. And so how we begin to kind of understand these things in relation to the elements, because if we understand according to the cosmological model that the constitution of man is solid and whole and one and robust, that there is no susceptibility, there's no kind of vulnerability for attack. If we're using that kind of languaging of enemies and attack, then our understanding of the 4 elements as how they relate to us in our constitution and bringing balance to them, and understanding that hawa, dunya, shaitan, nafs have these faculties attached to them as well. The faculty, for example, of ghadab, as you mentioned, and shahwa, and so forth, and how we can begin to work with them, as opposed to this idea of suppression, which we've kind of been noting as something not maybe the healthiest or most adaptive approach to medicine and healing and trauma work in general. And so just wanted to kind of throw that out there. I thought that was really an interesting kind of parallel. But Bismillah, I'm really curious to hear, what are the 4 tensions of the psyche and how do they relate with trauma work?
Well, as I'm going through Wonders of the Heart at the moment with Zabidi's commentary on it, so I'm just revisiting, and I said, as I was saying, we need to constantly revisit these things because new things are arising, as you know, as we learn more and more about trying to sort of integrate these and pair these with all the other disciplines we're studying in terms of neurology, attachment theory, developmental stages, trauma work, somatic work. We're trying to see where this all fits in. And what I really find helpful is to have these broad themes from an Islamic model, and then each clinician see how that relates to their modality. So these things are in the background when we're working as therapists and clinicians. They're to some degree, unless you're bringing psychoeducational piece in, a lot of the time they're not really brought to the foreground. They're in the background for us to just assess what's going on here. But like you were saying, we're working with these. When I said 4 tensions, I'm actually in the reading of the Ajaib al-Qalb, the wonders of the heart, or marvels of the heart. I missed that Imam Ghazali also speaks about ghadab, anger, as one of them. So there's really 5. And so I suppose that's Chinese. The Chinese have 5 elements, don't they? So
I'll remap it now.
yeah, we're gonna have to use a Chinese motto. What's the 5th element with Chinese medicine? I don't know.
So in Chinese medicine, they don't have air, and instead they put they have earth, wood, and metal. So they add wood and metal and take out air. Okay.
Now, first of all, I think it's really important that we go to the etymology and the root meanings of these words. There's so much confusion around these. And even in Arabic, sometimes they can be overlapping or interchangeable, as we've seen with the nafs, and we've seen with the qalb and the aql and the ruh. They can sometimes be used interchangeably. And when you're reading the context of their usage, you've got to ask, what's it really getting? What's the underlying theme of this this passage, and what's it speaking to? And so it can be very tricky for even people who are quite well versed in this field, to be honest. But this is the way I look at it, is that we've got 2 elements internally, well, 3 actually. We've got hawa, we've got shahwa, and we've got ghadab. These are internal tensions. And then we've got 2 external, the dunya and shaitan. For the 3 externals, 2 of them, fundamentally, they are healthy, inherently healthy, and they need to be almost fueled and channeled in a healthy way and worked with. And we look at how, shahwa and ghadab, we need to work with them. Hawa, we need to unpack and sort of bring it back into the fold. So you could say it's much more conflictual in that way, and it's actually something that needs to be it needs to be almost corrected. Whilst the others don't need to necessarily be corrected, we need to get to the core of what they're speaking to. Then we've got dunya and shaitan. Dunya, again, is inherently not evil, but shaitan is something obviously to be fought. So let's look at the 5. So let's look at hawa first, which is quite complex. Hawa etymologically means that you've lost your grounding. You're caught in something where you don't have, you feel a loss of control. And this, in this terminology, we're generally referring to cognitive beliefs that are causing a detriment. So they're basically deviant beliefs. I mean, in the nomenclature of traditional Islam, that when we speak about ahlul ahwa, we're speaking about people who have deviant beliefs, basically. And but as clinicians, we're looking at it as, we're not looking at it necessarily like that. We're looking at it as this person's holding beliefs that aren't serving them, and they're not congruent with their their lives. So hawa is specific to a belief that you hold. Whilst obviously it doesn't necessarily mean that in different contexts it can mean shahwa, it can mean desire. And I'm translating these as sort of, I mean, we could look at generally as desires or passions, but not in terms of carnal passions and desires. And shahwa, I'm translating as appetite. I don't like desire or passion with shahwa, because we're looking at shahwa is the 2, but fundamentally it's the sexual appetite, and it's the appetite for food. So that's what we mean by shahwa when we're speaking about this. Whilst hawa is passion and desire from a more cognitive, like someone's, a young girl's in love with this, toe rag, my daughter, and she believes he loves her and she loves him. She's in hawa, obviously as a father, I would say that this is something to be fought, because she's deluded. There's a delusion.
She's deluded, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a type
But
of lack of reality, lack of sense
she's
of reality
attached,
of the
yeah, she's
real.
attached, but there's a need there though still. But she's attached that need and interpreted it that it's in this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing she's formulated and attached to said it's that thing, that is where this is the Hawa, basically.
Got it. So it's like in this projected identification, we can call that. For example, like we talk about in our work, Norm, and all that, when we have a type of trauma, we have a type of loss of grounding, as you said, Hawa is kind of founded on this loss of grounding, this disconnection from ourselves, and then this projective identification of this belief that's not real. It can be protective, it can have some utility in some other way, but it's not inherently real. And because of that, it's hawa, it's a deviant belief. And for that reason also, it's unhealthy for the person in the long run, even if it's protective in the short term for whatever reason.
Yeah, so in the short term, it's serving a bit, in the long term as well. That's how I'm presenting hawa.
Okay. And I like how you said for the shahwa's appetite, which makes it much more, just humanizes the actual force, the human dynamic that's really just
use the word
core
desire,
of who we
passion,
are.
It's problematic, that word.
Yeah, it seems charged.
Yeah, and in Western, I mean, they did look at the appetites as desires and passions, and the Stoic approach is they are to be fought and resisted.
Yeah.
And even, you know, we do have that language within our, you know, Imam Ghazali is confusing sometimes. Sometimes he's arguing that we to go with them, and then look at the chapter breaking the two appetites, which sounds
the next chapter.
It's like, even like, notice how it's translated as breaking the two desires generally, but it's breaking the two appetites. You think, why on earth would you want to break the sexual? I believe they used hyperbolic language as, you know, it's like wa'adh. It's like when you use wa'adh, then you're sort of, how do they translate wa'adh?
Admonition.
Yeah, you're admonishing the person. You have to understand in traditional societies, there was a bit of a bit of fire to get people motivated to change. To motivate. That's, you know, sometimes when I'm speaking in front of a Pakistani crowd, they're saying you don't have enough like Josh
pizzazz.
Yeah, they said this English people so dry, and sometimes you have to understand the appropriate, you know, the appropriate way to address the crowd. And so we understand Imam Ghazali is speaking to a specific audience. And the Prophet ﷺ, we have to understand that when he says, if I were to be given the choice, these people that aren't turning up to the congregation, I'll burn their houses down. He doesn't mean that literally. He's using it as a wa'adh. He's admonishing and saying, this is a serious thing. So our appetites are serious, and they can be, if we don't have a grasp and control over them, they are serious. They can cause some serious havoc.
Absolutely.
And so that's how I'm framing shahwa. It's the two appetites, and then we've got ghadab, which is anger. Again, Imam Ghazali, he says, one thing I love about Imam Ghazali in Ihya is these metaphors he uses. They're so beautiful. He says that the rider is the qalb. So he's the horseman. The qalb is the one who's in control. And in other metaphors, he will say he's the king of the city. And then all the different parts of the body are like the subjects. But here he says beautifully, I love this analogy. He says the heart is the rider, the body is the horse. So we're going out hunting. We're going out to get what we need. So we have the qalb is me, is the rider on the horse. The body is the horse. So it's got dignity to it. It's got something that I cherish and it serves me. And then he says anger's the hunting dog. So it's voracious. It's like, you know, it's got a real sort of force to it. And we send it out to achieve things. And so, but here, the difference between ghadab and shahwa for me when I'm reflecting on them is, ghadab is almost, it's defensive. That's one element to it. Our anger enables us to defend ourselves and protect ourselves, but it also enables us almost to gain motivation to, I want this as well. And so it's the shahwa and the ghadab are in relationship with one another, but the shahwa is more obviously a desire. It's almost you're inclining towards something, you're realizing that you want that thing. And so there's these two energies that we're working with there.
Yeah. And they're inherently constructive, both of them. That's what I'm hearing when I hear you talking about that.
They're inherently constructive.
So, for example, in anger, I tell people, people have a lot of shame around their anger.
Okay.
Even if they don't even express it, they're like, I'm getting angry at my parent, or I'm getting angry at someone in my family who I was conditioned to not express anger to, or hold any grudges, or I know the rank of my parents in Islam and I don't want to earn the wrath of God, but I'm having these really raw, strong emotions. And I tell people, to differentiate between the existence and the feeling into of the emotion and the expression of the emotion, which can be healthy or unhealthy. But the actual feeling into and the having of the anger, for example, is not even, it's beyond natural. It's inherent to our existence, and it's an inherent piece of who we are and what it means to be a healthy human being in relationship to the world. And I say, by its nature, when the ruh expresses anger, it's usually because there's some sort of, it's feeling or it's experiencing transgression or oppression or something in the world, and there's something wrong that here's this rousing, or as you kind of connected to, maybe there's an appetite or some sort of need.
I'd say where do we hear the anger? The anger comes from the child when he starts to say no, which is an identification with his sense of self in relationship to the adult, the carer, which is very scary. But it's also got to be encouraged to some degree within obviously with balance.
Totally.
But essentially, when that child says no, he's actually, I have a self in relationship to. So if you crush that, then you have a very big problem. You have no sense of self in relationship to the other, which will create resentment. Because if you can't assert your needs, like Gabor Mate says, if you've got a choice between resentment and guilt, choose guilt every time. I feel guilty asserting myself. Because if you basically give up to the other, you'll walk away and feel a toxic emotion of resentment towards the other. So if you just say, I can't help you today, I'm afraid, I've got to go look after my wife needs me, my children need me, or I've got some priorities. I'll be, when I get some time, I'll be able to. But if that person keeps saying yes to the other and doesn't assert their prioritize their needs, they'll feel resentment.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And
then it just carries with you.
Guilt. It's better to carry the guilt in you because you can work with that. Guilt is that's something that's part of you that you have to work with. But resentment, you're basically projecting that person's taken something away from you, which that's very dangerous. So this anger is an incredibly important piece, and we don't want to be fighting the anger. We want to be nurturing it. We want to be able to refine it, and ask what its need is, rather than sometimes, you getting angry at this and that, and him or her. It's actually something underlying. Like Gabor Mate says in Scattered Minds, he says, when you're shouting at the person that just cut you up on the road, it's speaking to something very primal back to your childhood. That is,
yeah, that's true.
So where's that coming from? That's the trigger, and you need to. But if you're in that rage, almost like I'm gonna get you, that's speaking to something very deep when you're speaking, because that's childlike language.
And the solution to that is not to shame off anger or to stifle further and to shame the resentment and shame on you for carrying all this, even though in some way you can't escape it. If you don't deal with it and you don't allow it in a healthy way, you carry the shadow of it for the rest of your life. And so in some way, being able to allow that natural process.
It attacks you then.
It attacks you. Well, that's exactly. Actually, we find people in the clinical
you don't direct
space.
That anger outwardly, it will come back to you.
It will. It has to move. The anger has to move. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Autoimmune disease is kind of the body attacking itself, the self attacking self, unable to differentiate self from non-self and organize that in a cohesive kind of model of the self in the world. That's totally true. And so in some way, we need to be able to befriend our anger. This whole idea of la taghdab, being this faculty. There's no way, because Imam al-Ghazali talks about the cardinal virtues and shaja'a being connected to, shaja'a being courage, of course, being connected to the faculty of anger and having that balanced.
And the scholars spoke about this in the commentaries on that hadith where the Prophet said to the man, don't get angry. They spoke about how do we understand this, because you can't not get angry. So what's it speaking to? And so it shows these, how sophisticated our scholars were and how open and real they were. They weren't like dogmatic, like, well, the Prophet said it, we have to follow. They're saying, okay, I'm seeing some conflict here. How do we sort of, and this is how we always should be working as Muslims, who are passionate about their faith, is it's not this or that. How if it's never either or. It's like it's both and that's a mature. Totally. That's the adult mind. The adult mature mindset is that. How can they're both speaking to something? How can we align them?
Again, that transcending and including kind of thing. That image, that transcending and including. So even with the anger, I know he's kind of stopped at the anger here. I want to get back to the other tensions for sure. But anger is huge, And actually, Imam Shafi'i, he has this thing too, of thinking about the ulama and their relationship. Whoever doesn't get angry when they're provoked, it's a donkey. It's like his tongue. I see him like just saying that tongue in cheek almost. We have to be able to feel. There's no sin in feeling. There's no, quite the contrary.
Well, it's that's important. What you just said there is that we're not saying act out, but we're saying, can you hold it?
Can you hold it?
Can you contain it? Can you have a place for it?
Yeah.
And then feel it. And sometimes, like with clients, like if they're starting to feel agitation, I have to ask myself in the back of my mind, is this a person that's been violated in their past? If I ask them to sit with that, that can feel like they're being violated again. So I ask them, can they move their fingers in relationship to the agitation? Like I say to them sometimes, imagine there's string on one end of your finger and the other string's connected to the agitation. Can you almost feel like they're connected? And that makes them feel like they've empowered them because they're actually doing something. If you say to them, can you sit with it and be with it? That's the worst thing you could ever say to someone that's been violated physically, because it feels like they're being allowed to, that they feel the violation. Whilst other people, it works for them. Like, so it's not one treatment for all. You need to know how to work with that.
That's right.
Yeah. So is there anything else on anger?
We could take the rest of the time on anger, but I do want to move forward.
we do another one on that.
Inshallah. On that. Yeah.
So anger, we've said appetite, we've said desires, or you said a better phrase. I think I'm not happy with desires because it's still very ambiguous when we say desire with hawa. I think you said, what was the phrase? Did you give a term that was? You
used appetite.
No, that's for shahwa. For hawa, what we're translating for hawa. Because it's cognitive, they're cognitive or their beliefs.
The projective identification.
Yeah, that's what you used.
Projective identification, yeah. The delusional kind of framing of identity and all of that, yeah.
So there you go. Put that one down. Now, sometimes hawa can mean shahwa. Like that's the point, is that they can be used interchangeably, and so you have to. It is tricky that. Just in English, desires, passions, and appetites, they can be very confusing.
Yeah, so it's context-based.
Yeah, and if you read, so that book is essential reading, is George McCarry's Soul Machine. That he speaks about how the Europe, they really struggled with how to work with the desires.
Yeah.
And generally it was seen as they were in conflict and we had to fight them.
Yeah.
So the two externals now is the dunya, and obviously the dunya is what we attach those desires or those projected identifications or our anger upon, aren't they? So, that person's made me angry, or that person's who I desire, or that person, he's out to get me, or whatever it is. Basically, those internal tensions, these energies, they connect onto the dunya. The dunya is obviously not necessarily inherently evil. Dunya linguistically just means that which is within close proximity, that's before you. Obviously, it can mean this lowly world, and it definitely is used in that context in terms of base something that's base and, you know, it's not meritorious. But, you know, that depends on the context. And here we're using it simply as what we connect to in the world around us. That is not active. And when I say active, it's got a personality to it, because the shaitan has a personality to him. We see him as an active agent against us. Whilst the dunya is what, you know, we choose whether we attach to it or not, or our desires or our projective identifications do that, you know, because it could be conscious or unconscious. So then we have, so Dunya is straightforward, I think. I don't think we didn't do it.
Yeah.
Shaitan we've mentioned before, which is erratic and fiery. So there's fire to it, it's erratic, and it wants to take us afar. So this is why I love using psychological terminology, because as I was saying in the presentation I gave this week, if you meet a non-Muslim and you say the devil's out to get you, they say, come on, man, the devil's out. Are we in the Middle Ages still, where we believe in these things? if I say there's external forces that take you away from yourself, they say, yeah, man, that's definitely true. That's how I feel that. Well, we all feel those in our life, those forces in us, don't we? Like that could be our parents, that, you know, that could be friends that don't serve us, that could be just the pressure of time, you know, this sense of, there are forces that that induce a sense of anxiety and take us far away from ourselves. So the devil's at play. And you know, even from a psychological perspective, I think anyone, whether they're materialist or religious, can appreciate that that's what we're talking about. From not to dismiss, because as Muslims obviously believe there is a physical devil and there's demons, but they show up and we feel them, whether we believe them to be in that form or not. You know, everyone can acknowledge that. So what are the forces that are playing your life that are taking away? They feel external, they're not internal, so not projective identifications. They actually feel like forces that are at play against you and take you away from yourself, and they feel erratic, and they feel like almost they induce a sense of anxiety in you. That's what I'm referring to when we're talking about the devil in clinical practice, obviously.
Yeah. And even though the shaitan then is external, your response to the shaitan is more still of an internal kind of capacity, reorientation, fortification, so forth, because even in our tradition, the shaitan isn't inevitably effective. There's a way for us to protect ourselves from. We have the traditional salat and wudu.
Uncertainty. Umar. Look, what did Umar?
That's what I was going to. Umar, exactly. Yeah.
The valley. If shaitan meets him on the valley, he goes the other way, because the man had such conviction. He had a sense of self. And this brings us to an important topic, is where Umar says, I love you, O Messenger of Allah, more than everything except myself. That's between my two sides. So there is a sense that we do have a love of self. Like whoever says love of self doesn't have a basis in Islam, because the Prophet didn't disqualify that. He said, no, Omar. He said, none of you truly believe, have embodied until you love me more than yourself. But there's still a love of self there, because he has to reflect on that. Well, how do I love myself? Then how can I bring that? So ultimately, we want to love something more than ourselves. But we have to have a love of self before we can relate to that. And that's 100%. Why self-esteem, like we hear Muslims often criticizing self-esteem, and I understand why they are, but we have to have a level of self-esteem before we can let go of our self-esteem.
Yes, exactly.
And this is
or dignity, or respect, you know, however you want to frame it. Maybe like dignity sounds better. Yeah, frame it like you want. I mean, it's one of the maqasid, right? One of the objectives of Sharia is the preservation of the dignity of the human being. So it's there in the languaging of our tradition. But it's like somehow when we want to bring it into the world out of the crystallized form and into the more nuanced human textured form, and all of a sudden, oh, I don't like it. It sounds ego. It sounds like the shaitan's out to get me. It's like, no, you should have a strong sense of self. And we respect people with strong senses of self. And you will feel better and more able to do the work that you need to do to grow when you have a better sense of self.
But this is often so missing in, I'd say, more collective communities, which are immigrant communities, are obviously often coming from that background. Is where the collective is more important than the individual in the way they function. Is that I have clients sometimes when I say like, how do you relate to that in yourself? They say, can you stop talking about the self, please? It's really triggering me.
Yeah, right.
Because they don't have that sense of self, because they were brought up to put that to the side. And so I have to slow it down with the client then. And I have to have some psychoeducation about what I mean here. And that we can't, fundamentally, and we've spoken about this a number of times, is you have to have a reference point internally. That's what I'm speaking about. We can't always be asking others, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? We need to essentially be able to come back to ourselves and say, is this right for me here at this stage where I'm at? And so this is what we're talking about when we talk about self-esteem, or we're talking about love of self, or whatever you want to call it. But essentially, it's, do you have a self in relationship to other?
So can we say that all these 5 tensions in some way are working to scramble that reference point, the internal rootedness, that groundedness?
I say appetite and anger are not scrambling it. That we scramble ourselves if we try to suppress those two. Appetite and anger. If we start to fight that and feel like it's something we need to suppress, we will scramble ourselves. As for the others, they are the dunya as well. We need to be connected to the dunya. We need to have that's important. But definitely shaitan and the projected identifications that you named it. If you like, we need to definitely, they are major conflicts that we need
engage
to
with those. Yeah.
Engage with. We need to engage with them all, but those two, they're definitely to our detriment. They're inherent detriment. And but they're still gifts, because they're telling us where not to go. Shaitan's telling, when he goes this way, he's a guide, because
you're weak there.
And what do I do somatically with that? How do we combat that? Let's slow things down.
That's right. I mean, that's actually I find it to be a very inspirational model, because even in our medicine, we see symptoms as expressions of the life force. It's actually a good thing when you're like showing symptoms. It's a part of your constitution saying, this is where you're weak.
Your house alarm system's functioning. It's saying something's not right.
Absolutely. If you're immune compromised,
why do you want to get rid of the anxiety? We want to work with the anxiety. Is just a symptom. It's speaking to something that you feel something's being violated here.
Yes, and it's asking, it's begging for renegotiation and healing and integration.
Exactly.
I'm still not integrated. Integrate me. Anxiety, skin rash, IBS, whatever's coming up. I'm still not part of the greater whole. I'm that lone sheep. Bring me back, O shepherd, and allow me to be back in the flock and bring back into oneness. That's what I see disease, and so it's a mercy. It's a expiation, we know, but it's also a mercy, because it allows a person who's keen and wanting to grow and expand their consciousness and to purify their heart and to grow into increasing capacities of creativity and agency and all of that and relationship. It's like, oh, there's that piece. I didn't see that piece yet. Just thank you, Allah. And I mean, this is how it intersects even with our relationship with Allah Ta'ala. It's like these things can be gifts. They're not death sentences. They're not, compensations for sin. Well, I can't even think of the word. Punishments, oh my goodness. They're not punishments from God, These are things that Allah Ta'ala is out of His rahmah, allowing you to see. And He wants you to have these internal forces at your disposal to restore that balance internally, so that you can be able to bring that part of you in, whether it's an appetite, whether it's a shahwa piece, whether it's a hawa piece, whether it's an anger piece, whatever it is, and be able to organize that, make sense with that, work with that, so that your earth, fire, water, air constitution is solid, and shaitan can't touch you. You'll be like Umar. You'll be invincible in some way by Allah.
That's why I love Imam Ghazali describing the body as a horse, because if your horse becomes agitated underneath you, you don't hit the thing and say, come on, move on. you actually say, oh boy, calm down, it's okay. And that horse might be picking up on something in the environment, and it might be something that's actually, there's nothing there, you know, and you just calm it down. It's okay, boy, there's nothing there. But it also might be picking, but you've got to at least entertain that agitation from the horse. You can't just dismiss it. And
Absolutely. Actually, I have to pause you there because I actually had a direct example of that. My wife took my child on a horseback ride, a pony ride last week. And we've been going on the same pony for weeks now. No, and she loves it and everything. This time I didn't go with them. I was working, and they had a different kind of guide who was a young girl with no experience, clearly. So she's pulling the pony with my daughter on there. She's wearing her helmet and she's holding, you know, the little knob. But the horse was going to and fro and unable to kind of maintain course. And there's people behind us. And so at some point, the tour guide, Bismillah, she wants full attention. She doesn't want me here. The guide behind us whips the horse and launches my daughter off the pony onto the ground on her back. I mean, my wife, of course, got really upset. And she's like, why? Clearly the horse is distracted. The guide has no idea. She's like a 14-year-old girl, has no idea what she's doing and guiding the horse. What are you doing whipping the horse? We're not managing it properly. And this whole thing is a big mess. And my daughter's now on the ground crying. And that just came to mind here. It's like, in some way, that pony is our bodies. When we're showing symptoms, when we're not feeling wow, it's like, get off me, get off my back, you know. But it's like when we can really be connected to the horse and respecting the horse and at one with the horse in some way, at one with the steed, no one's falling off and you're going where you have to go and everything's gravy. But if you force it and you whip it, of course it's going to lash out. Of course it's going to respond to that in a way that's
And why is it that
harmful.
We love animals so much, even more in this time, is because I believe it's a projection of our own bodies, because we've neglected our bodies feel so neglected. We project that onto animals. And when I work with clients, I often have Hiba in the room with me, and she grounds them. She grounds my clients. I have clients actually request, when my next session's on, I want your cat in the room. Because they don't feel, because the human connection is too activating for them sometimes. Yeah, like when I'm connected with them, they start disassociating. So I say, look, there's the cat, and they just basically come down. I feel okay, and I say, you don't have to make eye contact with me. I say, just do that and feel. What's that feel like? Are you able to connect with that in your body, or just your general experience? If you can't do your body, what's it feel? Yeah, it feels a bit better. And then now can you reconnect? And I say, move your eye contact away from me if at any point it becomes triggering, and learn to respect your body. Learn to respect it. And as you do that, I think people will regain their hope in humanity. I think fundamentally you'll hear people say that it's like animals are lovely, humans can't stand them. You'll hear that all the time. All the time. Because people have lost their trust in relationships. Yeah. And so that's why often therapy, when people have lost that trust with humans, we do, animal therapy, isn't it? With dogs predominantly, and horses. It's regaining that trust in relationship because they feel safe with animals. Beautiful. Yeah. Safety. But you want to feel safe in yourself fundamentally. The animal that you want safety to feel is your body. But we sometimes have to externalize it to come back. Beautiful. Yeah, exactly. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Feels like a good place to stop. A good place to stop here. Okay. Barakallahu ta'ala something else you wanted to add?
Thank you. No, I think we covered it. I'm looking forward to hearing some feedback, inshallah ta'ala. I hope everyone could share with us how these 5 tensions landed with them. If you have any questions or any feedback or expansions, we'd love to hear them. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in. Inshallah, we'll see you all next time. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
Thank you.